I don't really call it the Venus cosmology. I call it a new cosmology, right?
I just
Meaning
call it the
a new,
Venus story this time.
yeah, sure. Okay, that's fine. And
So then you can
incidentally,
put
Venus,
everything.
yeah. What's interesting, I found when you shared the Egyptian astrology, which I was not familiar with, you shared that with me.
Hmm.
I ended up being Isis
Oh, wow.
in that astrology, right? Yeah,
I heard
which
it. I knew it.
okay, yeah, which is not
No, I'm
the
kidding,
most
but it's funny.
popular. Yeah, it's not the most popular term to use right now, ISIS,
But
because they associate it with this current group. But ancient ISIS obviously is a totally different figure.
oh, I
It has
didn't
nothing to do
think
with this.
about that. True.
Yeah, that's ISIS
And
right
they were
now
two
is
different, apparently. They had like the pharaoh uh, zodiac sign, and they had the ancient. So for me,
hmm
it was like the two of them were completely different. One is was
oh,
like the distraction, the god of distraction, and the other was like the goddess of nurturing. So like completely different between them.
okay.
So yeah,
So
I'm not sure.
that's interesting. But Isis ends up being the goddess who is represented by the planet Venus. So that's really
Ah.
interesting. Yeah, so it ties in over there too.
And also
Um,
like in the Pakistan flag, I mean, it's practically explaining this phenomenon, right? Like the star is
yeah,
inside the moon. It's not out. I
yes,
was checking it.
yes, it's inside the moon. And so
Yeah.
if you read the official description for the Pakistan flag, it's just that the green represents I guess the majority Muslim, the white represents peace or something like that, and the moon represents the moon, the star represents a star, and they don't go into much more detail. But I read up on the guy who designed the flag, and
Hmm.
his name is um, gosh, I can't remember. Anyways, but I read up on him. He had no significance either as far as spiritual knowledge or anything like that. But he was a follower, or they call over here, they call it murid. The murid
Hmm.
is a follower and of a particular saint, and that saint he has a big what do you call it? Structure there in Lahore. It's called Data Ganj Baksh, that place or that person. And so
Hmm.
his name is Ali Hujwari. And he was a very spiritual person. I read his book, Kashf al Mahjub, which was really powerful book, full of wisdom. And so I'm thinking spiritually, he was inclined to make this flag and put the star there. I don't know. Um, but at the end of the day, yeah, that is the thing I witnessed in the sky, the
But
star, which being Venus through the moon. Yeah,
did you
go
check
ahead.
like the conditions under which this phenomenon appears? Are there
hmm
specific conditions maybe, or like time of the year, or I don't know, something?
Obviously, it was a particular phase of the moon, a crescent waning phase, which is on our flag. It's on the Pakistan flag. It's also the waning phase. It's not the waxing phase. The moon is, in its essence, it's shrinking or about to disappear.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not sure why they use that. I don't know if that was logic either. But nevertheless, they use the waning phase. And that's the phase I saw it in. Um, so
Okay.
I don't know
But
what else I can
also,
say about it.
I guess there is a specific time of the year that the Venus is in that part of the sky, right?
Um, yeah, Venus follows the sun, basically. So even tonight, the star that's going to be in the brightest in the sky, if you look
Hmm.
towards the west, right, the western horizon, as the sun goes down. In fact, if I go out right now, I could probably identify it. It's probably there right now.
Hmm.
It's that bright of a star that it shows up at like 4 or 5 p.m. and you
Hmm.
can see it. But as the sun goes down, the brightest star in the sky, in the western sky, that's going to be Venus. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that's yeah, so that's for summertime. It was September when I saw it, so and that's closer to fall, I guess. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So we were more like in the part that you were saying about the new cosmology that you
hmm
stumbled upon, let's say.
Okay.
So you're gonna tell me a little bit more about
Go
that
into
because, yeah, flat
okay.
earthers. don't really have a very good reputation globally
Mm,
because many
yeah,
people just feel that we're going back into the times that we believed that the earth was like a plane and then we were falling down to nothingness. And I guess that's
sure,
not
right.
exactly what we're talking about.
No, and that's flat Earth. The people who are adherents of that, meaning people who follow that cosmology, I would call it, they also don't feel that the Earth, has an end to it, and then you fall off. That's not the point. The See, to best understand this, I mean, the logical process I went through after this Venus event was like, okay, there's no way anyone can land on a moon that is translucent, for example, right? Um, I don't like this title. You just type this, flat Earth, yeah. Okay, but anyways, um, yeah, so the Venus event that right after that, I made a firm, connection and decisions regarding my understanding of NASA and science in general, right? And one of the things that I realized was there's no way you can land on an object which is not material in nature, number one. And then I started observing the moon even in greater detail. I found stars through the moon, the sky through the moon. Venus, obviously, we had already seen that. Um, I did I have a telescope here, and just with my own observation doesn't mean that I'm doing something different from everyone else. It's just that when I look at these events, I don't just presume that the scientific explanation has to be correct just because it comes from an authority, right? And so I've seen lunar waves, if you've ever heard of that. It's literally waves like in an ocean, but on the moon, right? And that took me about 2 hour direct observation to see that 2 hours nonstop almost, and that's really painful for the eyes, by the way. But
Might be
I did
easier.
that, and so lunar waves, yeah. So the next connection, I said, okay, fine. I need to start from scratch. I need to delete all of this stuff that I've been following or assuming is correct, just because NASA and science in general is telling us this is the way things are. Um, and so what I did was I said, okay, fine. We're the majority of the Earth, 95% of it is water. The majority of our body is water. So we need to really understand what water is, right? And so if you take water, you put it in a glass, right? Pour it into a glass. It will take the shape of the glass, but the top of the water will eventually, find its level, right? And lay flat. Okay. Then you pour the glass into a bowl. It's going to take the shape of the bowl, but the top, meaning the surface of the water, will eventually find level. Do the same thing into a swimming pool. The same thing will happen. It will find level. Put it into a lake. It will find level. Put it into an ocean. Now the question arises.
Okay, we lost him, but hopefully he will be back soon. Let's see. If you have questions, please let me know. Until he comes back, I would like to show you actually one of the highest speculations of how they say that the moon was formated. And this is, for me, it's extremely interesting because it is scientific, it's purely scientific, but for me, it's deeply spiritual. So that's how they speculate that the moon was formated, that they collide with Earth, everything was mixed together. So all particles were just mixed. So there was no Earth and Moon. There was just like one big mass of energy that eventually started rotating around itself and it ended up creating the moon. So I'm showing a video that I sent you also. And this is the...
I think I'm back.
Can you hear me?
Most wonderful scientific abilities.
Can you hear me? I can hear you. No. So let's go back into the more information. So yeah, it's end up creating the moon eventually as it was rotating around the Earth, because we have seen that the materials of the moon is actually identical to the materials of the Earth, so it cannot be a different object. It has to be part of us. And this is, for me, this is a beautiful speculation, because for me, this is much more spiritual than scientific. For me, this represents the connection of yin and yang. So the two, the female and the male energy, mixing together and creating this balance. And interestingly enough, moon is representing the female energy and sun is representing the male energy. So I feel that this is really the closest that that astronomy has got into spirituality in a way that was not intentioned, but still. So let's see if he's gonna be back soon. So, Faraj, you can write me your no, Faraj. Fayaz Khan, you can write me your question of what you need to. Sorry, Fayaz Khan, please write me in your are you back? Q? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
I can hear you.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
You can hear me?
Yes. I can hear you.
Yes. I heard a bell. Okay. It's really irritating. I'm so sorry.
No worries. I was actually showing one of the videos that I came upon in a conference some months ago.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me? So I came upon this. I sent you also in WhatsApp this video of that is it's the latest speculations about how the moon was created. And the very, very interesting part about that, it's highly scientific. So it's simulations from the University of Zurich, right? It has nothing to do with spirituality. But the interesting part in it is when I saw it, for me, it was literally showing the union of yin and yang and how this is forming a dance between the two. Because the speculation is that there was an object that crashed upon the Earth, but Earth, like everything went into particles, and then everything shaped back into the Earth and the Moon. So that there's no difference between Moon and Earth practically.
Okay, interesting.
So it was super interesting, and
right.
Yeah, and it was very interesting because it had nothing to do with spirituality in theory, but for me, it was saying this story. But please tell me more about the flat surface and the vessel underneath. Do you hear me?
Okay. So yeah, the next step we take is we take the water from a lake and we throw it into an ocean. So far, every example I've stated, the water finds its level and lays flat. Okay. So when you take the water from the lake and you dump it into an ocean, that's the only example where science, turns a blind eye and says, no, when it's in the ocean, water doesn't find its level and lays flat. Instead, it finds curvature due to gravity and becomes arced, right? So oceans, that's the only way you can have a ball Earth, is if the oceans are bent into a sphere, right? Which is against the scientific method. Scientific method says, make a hypothesis or test a hypothesis, repeat it, measure it, test it again, have your peers do it, and then that's considered science, right? Well, water finds its level and lays flat in every single example except for the ocean, in which case science says, well, water finds curvature, right? Now, so obviously we can't test or measure that. We're taking the authority view and not the scientific method, right? So therefore, the nature of water is to lay flat. And so you could essentially say that means the Earth is flat, right? Based on that experiment. And then when you try to find curvature on the Earth, the measurement for a 25,000 circumference mile Earth is 8 inches per mile squared, right? And so we, as engineers or people who are into geology or any type of science, you can use all the tools that you have available, even the modern tools with lasers, and you will not find curvature on the Earth, right? So we've essentially accepted the pictures that have been shown to us as the ultimate reality of the Earth. We haven't verified it or tried to verify it ourselves because we deem it to be too difficult to do, right? And so yeah, go ahead.
But I think that initially the curvature of the Earth was not because we were examining the surface of the Earth, but because we're examining the sky. So because we're examining the circular movements of the stars, that we're speculating the curvature, like the Earth is it's a globe.
Globe, yeah. So that concept, right? So now let's get into the history, because once I did the water test and started thinking about how water behaves, because that's our ultimate reality. If 95% of the Earth is water, then as long as you understand water, then you can understand physical reality, right? And so then I said, okay, next is history. So if you go into the history of it, the ball Earth model, only time it was mentioned in the ancient past was by a Pythagoras, who's I guess a Greek figure, and so he mentioned it, and his contemporaries laughed at him that, well, what kind of silliness is this? That how can you presume that we live on a ball-shaped Earth that's heliocentric, meaning circling around the sun? He said, obviously the sun rises and the sun sets. We don't move, the sun does. Just as the moon rises and the moon sets, we don't move, the moon does. And that was the logic of the time, and that's what they argued with Pythagoras. So no one accepted his theory. And then all the religions, as far as the holy books, Hinduism, Buddhism. Well, Buddhism doesn't have that much cosmology in it, but the Torah, the Bible, and the Quran all have cosmology, and they have to, because that's the only way that God can prove that He is God. He has to know what is the ultimate cosmology. How did I set everything up, right? So
Mm-hmm.
all of those three books, four books, including Vedas and Bhagavad Gita, they express a flat, stationary Earth with a cosmos revolving around it, right? Uh, so the Hindu cosmology goes further and says we're on the back of a turtle, which is on the back of I think two ox, and this kind of thing. Islamic cosmology, if you go into the tafsir, it's called tafsir of the Quran, meaning interpretation of the Quran. The oldest
Mm-hmm.
one, which was written by Sheikh, his name is Ibn Kasir. And so if you go into that, he describes, he says that Noon, it's one of the letters in Surah Al-Qalam, that essentially describes our cosmology, which is on the back of a whale, right? So the
Mm-hmm.
Earth is flat, mountains have been nailed into it, and it's on the back of a whale, right? A giant whale. And the cosmos, stars, moon, sun, everything is revolving around it. So, ancient cosmology is more in line with what I'm saying, because, to be on the back of a whale, spiritually, it can mean so many things. Uh, the biblical cosmology is there's a dome above the earth, which is called the firmament. And
Mm-hmm.
the Torah also describes that firmament. It's like a glass structure on top of the earth, or wrapping around the top of a disc-shaped earth, right? Like a pizza with a dome on top of it. The crust of the pizza being Antarctica, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a cosmology that the world has accepted for thousands of years, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was only until this 500-year mark where Nicholas Copernicus flipped it over and said that no, the true cosmology has to be heliocentric, and he provided his justifications. And after his passing, apparently, it was accepted by the church and forced indoctrination throughout the rest of the world. Um, what I find interesting is when I describe my cosmology to people who have not studied science, they're
Mm-hmm.
willing and very open to it. But obviously, people who have studied science and take great pride in the steps that uh, NASA has taken, for example, they're the ones that are like extremely hesitant, almost combative towards it, and they say, how can you even think that? Haven't you seen a picture of the moon landing or of the Earth from Mars or from the Mars rover? Have you not seen the Tesla Roadster being ejected into space and blah blah blah? And I say, yes, of course I have seen those things, but according to what I know now, I feel all of those things are the greatest form of deception, right? uh,
How can it be though?
oh, okay. So to describe deception, right, that you're asking, how can they dare deceive us regarding
No, 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 no,
cosmology?
no, no. That's not my question. They
Oh,
totally
okay.
dare deceiving us. That's not the point. The point is like how far can we go? I mean, how far can we go in completely rejecting what our eyes have seen? And I can go quite far, finding different ways of explaining what our vision is justifying. But there are pictures, like like there is evidence of people who have seen it, and it's not only pictures. There are actually people sharing their own experience of when they traveled um, in the universe. The funny
Hmm.
part is like that as long at the same time as I'm telling that, I do understand that something that looks like a sphere, it's not necessarily a sphere.
Okay. So I have nothing against the shape. It's more
Mm-hmm.
about the nature of reality, right? The nature of reality, according to what I've understood, is that the only physical reality is what we're living here on Earth, right? That's the only physical reality. Everything else is spiritual in nature, right? And spiritual, basically, that's a word we use when we can't explain something, right? So to say you and I, for example, have a soul, right? We are unable to, we don't have the language to describe what we're talking about. That's why we say
Mm-hmm.
that's a spiritual subject, right? So spirituality is another word for magic. It's another word for the, anything that science is unable to explain, right? And so all of those objects essentially are spiritual in nature. And what they have done by making it a material object and by showing us these images, and to me, those are all doctored CGI images. It's a great, great, great effort. It's not, I'm not saying it was easy what they have done, but they do get funded like 20-30 billion dollars a year to provide those images to us. So they have a good enough, but better budget than most Hollywood movies have, and Hollywood makes a pretty good case too. But I think
I tend to see that more of it like being a deception story. It's more like that's what we were believing in, so that's what we were researching for.
Sure, yeah, that's also a good point. What I was going to say is, in regards to how this scientific cosmology took over, right? It was basically the advent of advancement of science itself, because science stepped in. I use the term science kind of loosely as an institution, right? Science is an institution, and then it's a scientific process. I totally believe in and practice the scientific process, but as far as the institution goes, it's corrupt, just like every other institution. And that's what people have difficulty kind of understanding, that science as an institution is corrupt. Why would they lie to us about something like this? And so you get into all of the other institutions of the world. For example, let's start with finance, and you realize that money has no intrinsic value. All of these bills that are printed, they're not backed by gold. They're not backed by anything. It's out of thin air, and it's all derivative, meaning they derive value out of pure calculations, right? So the whole industry of finance is based on a false premise, right? So we put that aside, then we go into medicine. And so medicine, basically now with allopathic medicine being the dominant practice throughout the world, it's all based on chemically engineered pills, which are meant to resolve or cure one problem, and thereby causing 100 or 1,000 side effects for other problems. And so herbal medicine and the traditional way, where you just find something off the ground, you test it, you experiment with it, and you find out what it cures or what it relieves, and you take that way of producing medicine has been forgotten. Now it's all scientifically, chemically engineered, and then so our food is as well. So yes, I take a Panadol or a Tylenol when I have a severe headache or fever, and it does help, definitely. But the side effects to it, I don't know what all they are. Allopathic medicine is based on, you can either say a false premise or a corrupted premise, right? So that's your entire field of. Go ahead.
Yes and no. Like for me, medicine and the way that medicine was done in the ancient times, it doesn't have any difference. The difference is that in the ancient times, we were actually allowing the window that maybe not all medicine is adequate for all people. And we were like researching what is necessary for this specific person. When now we have taken this average person, we have tested the average person, and we believe that if it applies to the average person, which is something that doesn't exist anyhow, it will apply to each and every one of us with no other conditions, which it's kind of like irrational.
Mass production. Yeah, it's the result of overpopulation and then mass production of everything. Sure, I agree with you. But what I'm saying, for the most part, traditional homeopathic medicine and the practices and the perfection that they had achieved in, for example, China at one point, because it's no longer practiced, because herbs are no longer sought after, and those type of compounds or combinations are not something easy to do. We don't have the knowledge anymore. Therefore, we rely on these big pharmaceuticals to chemically manufacture or engineer these products, and then we take them instead, right? So that's what I refer to as allopathic medicine. The concept of taking chemically engineered products, and then you have to, buy them essentially, so it's a giant business, it's a giant industry, but it's also based on a corrupted premise, right? which is that unless you engineer something chemically, then it's medicine. If you don't do that, then it's not medicine. You're just taking a risk with, you know, what they call drugs, right? Ayahuasca would be considered, you know, some type of drug. I don't know what category it is, but that the mushrooms of our
Let's
time
say
are
plant
considered.
medicine.
It's right, yeah, yeah. So
It's a neutral word.
yeah, then you get into governments like democracy, the concept of democracy, right? So we've left finance, you know, for the most part, false, medicine, corrupted or false. You get into government, and then you're like, okay, the concept of democracy is transparent rule by the people, of the people, so forth, right? But every single major democracy in the world, Pakistan, India, America, the United Kingdom, France, right? All of these so-called democracies also host clandestine organizations, which pretty much bypass every single rule created by the democracy, right? Because they're not transparent. Those agencies or organizations are allowed to do as they please. Their budgets come from God knows where, right? And their operations are also equally things that we cannot, you know, we can't ask for documentation on, we can't ask for the results of whatever efforts they've taken, and therefore they null and void the so-called democracy. As long as
Yeah,
you
but
have an
like
organization like that,
let's
yeah.
not underestimate something. Like let's not underestimate that systems arise, have their peaks, and then they fall, right? And we cannot expect that systems will keep rising for 2,000 years. We have the first democracy was like more than 2,000 years now. So of course it has its peak, and then it has its decline, and then it's when we have to find new systems. We cannot expect that one system will just work forever. And I feel that that's where we're actually getting deceived all the time. We're searching for the ideal. We're searching for this one system that will just solve all our problems, and that doesn't exist. Like we are evolving. Even our whole universe is moving towards expansion. So like even the universe is expanding itself. How we believe that we can find something in one specific point in time, and this will just continue applying for the rest of eternity or something. I think we lost you. Can you hear us? I should stop talking about these subjects because the connection always gets lost when we start talking about the universe. So let me see if he's gonna be back soon. Can you hear me? Nope. Hopefully. So if you have questions, I cannot open the Zoom link because it's mostly an interview and a conversation about the subject, but please feel free. So Hashia, that you're asking for the Zoom link, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'm looking at the comments and we'll be more than happy to answer the questions. So what would you like to express? Tell me and I will express it as a question. And everybody else, if you have questions or if you have opinions, I would love to hear them. I would love to see them in the chat and we can take them to the next call. I feel that these calls with Q have a really nice continuity, so we might go on and do more. So write me subjects and send me also in private message. Oh. You have doubled yourself.
Oh, really? I came on twice? Okay.
Yes.
I don't know. I was already on? Okay.
You're still twice, but it's fine, no problem.
Okay. Okay. All right. So yeah, I heard you. Systems rise and fall, and so this is a cyclical process. That's what you were saying, right? Okay.
Now you became one again.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's funny.
The mutation is completed. Yeah, you can go on.
Okay. So, so yeah, so you know, all of these subjects I just quickly went over, and yes, I'm being I'm making blanket statements here. I'm not saying this is the only truth, but I'm saying that this is the end result I ended up with when I was,
Mm-hmm.
doing my study. And so to presume that all of a sudden there is one, institution which is not going to try to deceive us and which is going to tell us the truth as it is 100%, uh, for example, science or cosmology. Cosmology specifically, there's much truth in every one of these fields that I just mentioned, but
Mm-hmm.
the core premise that they're based on, right, or the end result they want you to accept or be a part of, is a form of deception, in my opinion. And so this when this scientist of the time, like Nicholas Copernicus, then it was Isaac Newton, who supported Nicholas Copernicus's theory by providing the logic of gravity, and then Einstein with the general theory of relativity further supported the same heliocentric model by providing the relationship for interstellar objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all of these things were in support of one another, and all of them, right? The heliocentric model being the primary basis for all of this. Uh, it was against what the religions of the time or of our ancient time have been saying in their books, right? So all the religions projected one cosmology, science projected another, and it wasn't until 1969 where they had the audacity to so-called provide the picture. So a lot of people think the moon mission was about the moon, but if you look at the impact of the moon mission, it was more about the ability to take that one picture of the Earth, which we call, is referred to as the blue marble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the blue marble image is what that moon mission provided to us. It was the first time someone had been far enough, apparently, to take that kind of an image. And that changed cosmology more so than any of these previous scientists with their theories. Because the previous scientists and their theories, it was just something that the intellectuals of that time would have access to, right? The general public would not know anything about cosmology, and that wouldn't really be a topic of discussion. But once the 1969 event happened, then it became general knowledge, and all of our textbooks, include that image, that blue marble image in it. And so it was you can say, anti-religious cosmology, and science won, right? They won
But can
because the
let me ask you something. Isn't it let me ask you something. Isn't it absolutely normal then when humanity is going through the phase of the sun, that was the phase after Christ, we're going through the phase of becoming teenagers practically. So I feel that the scientific period was our teenagehood as humanity. So we had to discharge everything that our parents said. That was the age of religion before. Find our own truths, and then realize that maybe both have some rights. It's not one or the other. But isn't it
Yeah.
absolutely normal if we believe that the whole human journey is spiritual, that what we could see during this phase is a heliocentric approach? Because for me, it just absolutely makes sense that that's what we were experiencing. So that's how we explain the world.
Uh-huh. Sure. I mean, we've been indoctrinated in this heliocentric model since our childhood, because unless you are from the, let's say from the 1800s, right? Which I don't think there's anyone alive from that time period anymore. Uh, 1900s was all about the heliocentric model, and it expanded to every single country and every single educational institution, right? Um, so from the organic thought process that you have, I really enjoy that about, every comment you make has this really organic approach to it, and I like that. It calms my nerves when I hear it. So thank you for that. But
Because I feel
but
it's less a conspiracy, more like a global level of consciousness.
Yeah,
I
sure.
don't think we knew better.
I would like to agree with you too. And I wrote my book as in a way to, uh, as a compromise between spirituality and science, right?
Mhm.
So, uh, the particle physics I told you it's a contrast between particle physics and spirituality, right? That was the
Mhm.
intention. But then as I discovered this, I was like, uh-oh, right? I have a big problem here for myself. It's not for anyone else, but for me, became a huge problem because I can no longer compromise with what science is telling me because I've essentially understood and accepted the opposite of that after 40 years of being an adherent to what the scientific institution tells us. Um, so this process that you're referring to, this evolution, I want to add two more points in here, right? As far as
Mhm.
cosmology is concerned, that in order for science to put, as they say, the final nail in the coffin and prove that these ancient books are false, right? Because the scientific cosmology, if you accept it, then you have to say that these religious books are obviously describing a totally different cosmology, and
Mhm.
therefore that cannot be a true God if he doesn't even know that the sun is the center and the earth is a ball revolving around it, right? If God cannot express that in his religious books, then that must not be a God, right?
Mhm.
This is the conclusion, that logical conclusion someone can draw. But the final nail in the coffin was they didn't stop at the heliocentric model. Then it was the so-called discovery of dinosaur bones, right? And
Mhm.
so the whole dinosaur concept is also something that you can use. Like if you want to know if a particular holy book is written or is the author of that book was God, he must mention the heliocentric model, number one, and he must, not in those words, but at least he should describe it, right? And then he must mention the existence of dinosaurs, right? And so none of these religious books either none of them mention dinosaurs and none of them mention the heliocentric model. They don't reference it at all. It's the exact opposite, right?
But of
That
course, our holy books have been written during this 5,000-year period, not the
hmm hmm
previous 5,000-year period. We don't have
But,
written
but that's the
documents from
thing.
the previous period.
Yeah, that's actually my point. That science, the effort of the scientific institution, right? Not science in general. Science in general is just using a method to understand something, but the scientific institution is pretty much validating the fact that all of these holy books were not written by a true God because he did not mention these things. They don't say it outright, but a logical person would approach it like that. Another thing is the evolution theory. None of the religious books, even the Bhagavad Gita, right, or the Vedas, or the Torah, Bible, or the Quran, or the teachings of Buddha, none of them mention the evolution theory, which is, from ape to man, right? Which was a theory by Darwin. So it's a combination of three things I'm going to mention, right? It's scientific cosmology, which is heliocentric. It is the theory of evolution, which is Darwin's theory, and it is the concept of the existence of dinosaurs prior to man, right, inhabiting the earth, or maybe simultaneously inhabiting the earth. All three of these things are anti-religion, and when I say that, I mean that you cannot find evidence of any of these three things in any of the religious books, right? And therefore, this is the religion of science, right? And we have all, as a global society, right? And I use the term global very loosely because I don't adhere to the globe model. But as a global society, sorry, as a global society, we
The
we
flat
we
society doesn't sound so good.
that doesn't sound so good. Yeah, and when I use this now, whenever I talk about the Earth, I don't say around the Earth. I say across the Earth, just to just to be like check mark in my mind. Okay, I'm on the new cosmology. I can't use those terms anymore. But so essentially, it's these three things, right? And they're major things. They have been accepted by, I can easily say it, 99.9% of the world's intellectual society, right? And in general, everyone else is a student of those intellectuals, or adheres to what these intellectuals of those societies say. So therefore, the majority of the world accepts all of these things, right? And
yeah, but the interesting part is that they are changing, right? Like, but please go on, because we
yeah,
have new
no,
evidence about that. So that's a very interesting part for me.
yeah, sure. And so I I'm not a strict adherent to whatever these holy books have said, and that's it. No, I also want to discover. It's not that I'm a blind follower. No way. I am definitely open-eyed and open-eared, and I love discovery and I love researching, and I want to find the truth for myself as well. But when I do my basic science, which is applying the scientific method, right, as I did with water, uh, I don't find any of these things to hold true, right? Especially cosmology. The dinosaur thing, it's one bone that leads to someone fabricating other parts of the so-called dinosaur in order to make this giant lizard that walked the earth, right? Uh, so they discover essentially one bone, which could have been anything, and then they presume that this must be the femur of a Tyrannosaurus Rex, for example, right? And the rest of it is pretty much fabricated, right? And you can go in. This goes into the subject of, I believe, anthropology, right? Which you wanted to discuss, I think.
But isn't it fascinating that how we can come up with entire models from a very, very small fact? I find it like fascinating, really.
Yeah, it's called having an agenda, right? So when you have an agenda, right, it's easy to do. Like if I had it, for example, if I had an agenda that I want to reduce the world's population, then a difficult way would be to go to war with every country that has excess population in it. That would be a very expensive and very difficult process. I would instead provide charity through for example, I don't know, polio vaccine, right? And inject it with a nanoparticle time delayed for 20 years, right? And then after having it, providing it as a form of charity to all the countries by force, by the way, I would then, have my population reduction. It would just take 20 years. I would be patient and wait for that. This was something that I've read about four PhD thesis papers on the polio vaccination of Congo in 1957, right? Congo, Africa, and which about 5 years after they were vaccinated for polio, Congo, Africa was the first place in the world where they discovered the AIDS epidemic, right? Incidentally, right? It's a pure coincidence, just as Wuhan with 5G and Corona is a pure coincidence. So, I mean, these things are disturbing, but at the same time, it tells me that there are people in the world, and there are powers that be that have, such excess wealth, access to such excess resources, that they can be concerned about these types of global issues and then play a role in making things happen, right? It requires a huge amount of initiative to do something like that, right? Courage as well.
And combination
But
of many forces, right? Like it's
oh
not
yeah,
one, it's not one single person doing that. It's
right,
impossible.
right. Yeah, it requires some kind of organization.
Of course.
But at the same time, yeah, my studies lead me to believe that that is the case, right? And so I don't live in fear. I wouldn't say that, but I do. I detest mainstream knowledge, mainstream media, mainstream everything that's dominant in the world. I approach it with a giant question mark. I don't have trust in it. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, I'm fine. I'm fine the world with the world as it is, and I do trust that it will improve. But I don't accept a lot of the concepts which have been force fed through our institutions, right?
For me, to tell you the truth, it kind of fascinates me, because if we can do that, imagine what else we can do if we join forces. So like we
Okay.
can come into terms for destruction. Probably we can come into terms for creation also. It's just not the norm, but that doesn't mean that
Yeah,
the norm cannot change.
right. It's just one flip of the switch.
Yeah.
Just like you take someone who, for example, has committed major crimes, maybe murder, maybe the other major crimes, and in Sweden you discipline him in a beautiful prison environment, and 10 years later you rectify him, you bring him back into society, and he or she becomes a productive member of that society, right? I've seen it happen. It's definitely possible. You can, everyone has the capacity for evil and for good. I totally agree with that. And so, yeah, I don't have fear. I just have the, what do you call it? The comfort of knowing that, unfortunately, majority movements, majority thoughts are, for the most part, easy to corrupt, right? Because you can look at history and that's what has happened, right? It's always the minority, right? Typically one person in any age that comes in and changes that entire world structure, according to what has happened through these religions, right? It's always one person, and so yeah. So I do believe change can happen. Yeah, to make a long story short. Okay.
But going back into the cosmology, I would like to understand further. So how is your idea, like, okay, I understand the idea about the surface. How is the rest of the vessel of the Earth? And how does that connect it? How is the rest of the vessel? So like where is it held? And how does that actually connect to spirituality?
Okay, fine. So if you want to, like, once you can call this the flat Earth model, right? Because essentially they agree with, I think, most of what I'm saying. The only difference is they say that we know the model, right? So the ones who say they know the model, they are totally speculating. They don't know what the model is. When you get on this new cosmology, or you discover that the old one that we're being taught by science is false, once you have discovered that and you've made it firm, it requires a ton of research. So therefore, it requires a ton of interest. You have to have that much interest, right, to do it. But once you're done with that, the next step is, okay, what is this new model, right? And so the new model, essentially, it ends in Antarctica, right? And I think the last time we mentioned this as well. Antarctica is the one body of land on Earth which man all of a sudden became kind and considerate and conscious, and said, oh, no, this cannot be a country, this cannot be a nation state, and so therefore no one can own this land, no one can claim it, right? And we have all agreed to it. So there was a treaty signed in 1958. It's called the Antarctic Treaty. And so it was signed by 12 countries who were basically the powers that be after World War II. And they say that no one should be allowed into Antarctica unless it's for research purposes, and then it would be closely monitored. Second, if someone comes for touring Antarctica, it would be a guided tour provided by, such agencies and what have you. And if someone comes illegally to Antarctica, then the government representatives that are there have the power to essentially shoot and kill whoever that is entering this land, right?
Interestingly enough, just by coincidence, let's say, yesterday I came across the first Pakistani woman that has been to Antarctica. Apparently there's an organization that wants to bring 100 women per year into Antarctica for scientific reasons. And they're doing like a whole campaign. It's only for women. It's only for scientist women. And it's actually to bring them to Antarctica into an expedition. And I found it fascinating because expedition used to be mostly, not that women were not going to expedition, of course they were, but it was mostly like a male
dominated, yeah.
Because of the physical difficulties, right? Of course.
Sure.
And it was very interesting because I keep observing how our society changes, and I hear that about Antarctica, and I remember that about 6 months ago, We were watching a film in Zurich that is about extreme sports. And I keep watching this film every year. It comes out once a year. It's kind of like a landmark. And it's always like a very interesting stories of people who are doing extreme sports, but like to the absolute extreme. So like parapente in the highest peak on the world, like 9,000.
Wingsuit.
Yeah, exactly. No, even further than that. Like that's kind of
insane.
Normal. Yeah.
Oh no, I don't know anything more extreme than wingsuit. I think that's insane.
Of parapente alone into the highest peaks of the world that you don't have enough oxygen actually to go around.
Oh, okay.
And if you land somewhere, you are landing in fields that are territory of terrorists, so you might be killed where you land to sleep.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's extreme.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That's like next step. Anyway, so I was looking at that and I was observing that, funnily enough, this time was the first time that the majority of the stories were about women doing extreme sports, supported by their partners. So kind of like flipping around the paradigm, you know?
Right.
It's fascinating, but I would like to hear more about what you found about Antarctica.
Okay, so yeah, so Antarctica is basically the answer, right? If you accept that the current cosmology is incorrect, then all eyes and all questions lead towards Antarctica, because this is again I say the one piece of land which has been least exposed to man, number one. Number two, it's the only piece of land on Earth which is not a nation state, and it's not claimed by any nation state, right? So the treaty that was signed in '58, it was they signed it again. I don't remember which year. I think '90s or something. And that was 58 countries then. So first time it was 12 countries, then 58 agreed and signed on board. Even Pakistan has their what's called Jinnah station, named after Quaid-e-Azam Jinnah, a research station there in Antarctica.
And Antarctica, it's one of the places that the US have extreme interest, right? And every place on Earth that US have extreme interest, it's kind of like you have to look upon it.
yeah, exactly. And so let's go pre-World War II. The major expeditions to Antarctica, right, at that time, which was rare. I mean, if it's rare right now, at that time it was extremely rare. And so the major expeditions, meaning big parties of people and battalions and whatnot, were sent by Hitler and the SS. So this was heavily explored by Hitler, and it was a great interest of his and the Nazi regime of the time. And as you may know, that the majority of NASA, it was founded in the same year that this treaty was signed on Antarctica. So as the Antarctic Treaty was signed, NASA was founded, 1958. And the majority of the people in NASA, the top leading scientists, especially the founder, Werner von Braun, these were all ex-SS soldiers from the Third Reich. They were all Hitler's henchmen, right? The majority of them. And they were brought into the United States through an operation which is called Operation Paperclip, something like that. And so they were brought in. These are the founders. So they had the most knowledge of Antarctica and ended up becoming the founders of NASA, right? Which was essentially if you're on New Cosmology, NASA is the organization which hid the truth of Antarctica in favor of space exploration, right? Which is
how do they two relate?
Because space is non-existent, right? Meaning there is no realm that you can get into from the non-vacuum environment of Earth into the vacuum of space, right? There's no way you can enter, from one non-vacuum to a vacuum without having a solid barrier in between the two, right? Physically, that's impossible. And an easy way to explain that is if you get a vacuum cleaner, the only way it can be a vacuum cleaner is if it has an enclosed box within it, which allows it to produce the vacuum effect. If it's not enclosed, if it's an open box, right, or not a box, I guess, it's just an open environment, then it can't produce the vacuum effect, right? The vacuum effect requires an enclosed space. And so therefore, you cannot have a vacuum and a non-vacuum environment side by side without having a solid barrier between the two, number one. Number two, if you have a rocket ship, yes, you can propel yourself up into the atmosphere, but if you get into space somehow, which I don't believe you can, right? But let's say NASA is correct and you can get into space, you cannot propel yourself against an environment which has no mass, meaning there's no friction, right? So to move on water, you propel against the water, and that's what provides you the momentum in the water. To propel on land, you move against the land, friction from the tire to the land, right? Tire or whatever object, you know, a chain for a tank or a tire for a car. You propel it against the land, you know, friction against the land, and that provides you momentum. And the same way for air, you're propelling against the air pressure, right? But when you're in a vacuum environment, there's nothing to push against. There's no friction. And therefore, you cannot have any movement in a vacuum environment. Because no matter what kind of propellant you have, right, it can't burn in there because there's no oxygen, number one. And number two, there's nothing to push against. And that's why
by the
if
time
you want
we
to
get,
call someone...
but the theory is like by the time you get into the space, it's mostly by gravity that you land. It's not by propelling anymore. And actually, that's
propel.
what they.
I mean, how do you get to the moon?
Not after you get out of the Earth sphere, of the atmosphere. After there's no propelling, there's no point.
You're in zero. Yeah, this whole concept, right? That's what I'm saying. It's all tied together. You have to break it down one piece at a time. It's very, very difficult to get past it, right? But basically, it's the imagination which allows us to accept it. And so, and you know, images and videos help, obviously. But essentially, what I'm saying is that if someone is considered the smartest person, right? If you find someone super intelligent, the typical what do you call it, statement that's made is that person must be a rocket scientist, right? The rocket scientist being the most difficult field. And the reason that's used is because it's essentially an impossible field. You can have a rocket that propels in the atmosphere, but beyond the atmosphere, for it to be able to propel in any manner is logically impossible in a vacuum environment. And therefore, only a rocket scientist can figure out how that happens. And the way it happens is, you know, they basically are using your imagination, right? You're seeing it from a third perspective. And so now the point or the case would go that, okay, well, there have been at least 250 people who have gone to space, right? So how can, if this is a lie, how can you keep it a secret amongst 250 people, right? And more, all of the administration and staff and, you know, so forth. And, you know, that pretty much is up for grabs, I guess, just as much as you can keep the true nature of finance a secret, right? Where everyone's trading money and, you know, exchanging bills and knowing, you know, a lot of them know that it really has no value, but they still do it. You know, everyone taking allopathic medicine and accepting that and, you know, the side effects from it and saying, well, we don't have any other choice. Everyone accepting democracy being false, but still going out to vote because, you know, hey, this is just the way it is.
But what do you feel with the reason behind hiding it? Because that's the point. Like, I can totally see the reason in hiding the true side of finance, for example. It's like pretty clear. But what do you feel it's the reason behind hiding the true nature of the moon, let's say?
Sure. So the heliocentric model and the concept of space pretty much decimates all firm belief in religion, right? And so people still practice religion, but then they're like, well, science is more important because it's practical. It's about our, you know, the reality of life. And religion is something we do on the side, right? I don't take it that seriously, right? So the main, one of the main objectives was this, to dominate over, because prior to science, religion and these religious doctrine dominated over the minds of men, which again, I'm not saying that's the best way to live life, but you know, if that is closer to the truth, then sure, why not, right? But science brought in this model, and so it has essentially dominated the psychological mind, right? So if you don't know your physical reality as a human being, that it is not a ball Earth floating in a space environment and circling around a sun, if that's what you think it is, it makes you think that, you know, for example, why did the creator make a cosmos this huge when we are supposed to be his, main creations, meaning we are the objective creations that he's kind of monitoring and watching and evaluating our behavior? Then why have this entire cosmos, which, creates the potentiality for other life? Number one. Number two, the whole physical alien concept, that aliens live on another planet and they're going to come here and, they visit us. This is also something brought about by heliocentrism and science. Prior to that, if you want to translate what aliens are according to religious doctrine, you can easily explain that as being demons. In Islam, they call them jinn. In English, they call them angels and demons. Those types of beings. So those were the terms used in religious books, angels and demons, and in science, they translated that to alien, right? So belief in physical alien. Again, it's all about, the importance of the physical realm and denial of anything spiritual, right? And the best way to do that is to change the language, change the mindset, number one, but also change the language. So our language has changed. It was 100% effective. We, as a global society, even using the term global is the effect of science on me and you, right? But global society, we are entertaining all of these concepts and accepting them as a potential reality, as opposed to the ancient spiritual concepts, which actually, they don't have these ideas, and they never did. It's all a pretty new invention. If you think 500 years, it's not really that long ago. So 1500 to now is the life. So go ahead.
But to tell you the truth, I don't necessarily embark in the idea that there is one truth. I tend to believe that our consciousness is able to open up more doors and just see different parts of what is. I definitely don't feel that the human brain can reach the extent of the whole universe. At the same time, yes, we can contemplate on it, but I don't.
Yes, exactly.
I don't believe that we can understand it the way that we are used to understand things. I don't think we can understand it with the human brain. We can experience it, we can be it, but understanding it, I think it's minimizing it down to only one organ of us, the brain, working upon a vast subject.
Agreed. And so therefore there is no model for the new cosmology, meaning I can't tell you where Antarctica ends, right? Because number one, it hasn't been traversed, meaning no one has gone from one end of Antarctica to the end, right? There are tour groups and there are people who have performed expeditions there, and they lead you to believe that they circled the bottom of the earth, right? But if you chart their paths, right, they've only gone across one side of Antarctica. It's like going around it.
But for me, this is actually the new model, The new model is that you don't need somebody telling you.
Yeah, sure.
The old model is that we have somebody who has authority and is telling us what to believe. And this is what has been through the whole history. This was the norm. Even in the ancient history, that was still the norm. Somebody was telling you that had more authority or more knowledge, and he was telling you how the world is and what you have to study. But I feel that we are breaking away of this model. And actually the new model is that there is no model. There is no one guru. There is no one who knows everything telling you what you should know. There are people that can guide you in specific paths, but then you have to break through your teachers also and go further and understand what is your truth.
Agreed. And so I totally agree with you, but I want to make one point, which is uh, most of the things you say, right? Even what you've just said right now, this is an alternative opinion. This is not
Mm-hmm.
mainstream. The majority of the people in the world adhere to the general scientific theories and understandings. And so what the things that you're saying is definitely an alternative viewpoint. But despite you people that are in your position that have these alternative views, they still are so well indoctrinated by the scientific cosmology that most of them do adhere to it, right? In their mind, when you think about yourself, right? All of us as human beings, we think about ourselves starting with our body, right? That this
Mm-hmm.
is like I'm Q, you're Aliki, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we look at our body and we say this is us, and then the largest view that you can keep in your mind is the cosmological view, and it's
Mm-hmm.
to me it's equally important. Sorry, you're going to be a minute for all the prayer calls. Sorry, I'm going to
I
put you on
think we
mute.
have we have like a bell, like end of the session or something from religion. It's like, now that's enough for now.
Yeah, something like that. True.
So funny. So I will have to go very soon anyhow, but I would like you to form a question that actually for me it's fascinating, and it's fascinating because we start having even facts for that, and we start having facts that our story, how humans were created, it's not exactly as we have been told by Darwin either. So there are so many pieces that they actually don't follow the Darwinian story of human creation from evolution, that it's very soon I thought it will be impossible for us to ignore them anymore. Right now, we don't know where to put them. So it's always like that. When we have new facts or new ways of approach life and we don't know where to put them, we just ignore them. It's just difficult to change the whole story. So we keep them aside until they become so much that they start pushing into a new story. And I would like your opinion about that. And maybe we can take it like to a next session because I will have to go very soon. But do you are you on the Darwin part? Are you on how did humans came up? Because I feel that we can even not even start talking about the cosmos if we don't understand also a little bit more about us.
Sure. Great topic. Um, I haven't looked into it specifically as much,
Mm-hmm.
but I can tell you that no, I don't adhere to Darwinian evolution, um, because Darwinian evolution is part and parcel of scientific materialist cosmology, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the Big Bang Theory being a part of that, scientific materialist cosmology with the heliocentric model, dinosaurs, and Darwinian evolution. These three things work hand in hand to combat all of the ancient scriptures, right? Defy the ancient scriptures actually. Defy
Mm-hmm.
meaning they are saying things exactly 100% opposite to what the ancient scriptures are saying, right? And when I say ancient scriptures, I mean, again, should I make the list or we already understand the list? Meaning Hinduism,
Yeah.
Judaism, Buddhism, Christianity, Islam, right? These are the dominant
Mm-hmm.
ones. And then if you, because I love the fact that you used the term shaman in our first conversation. I was like, wow, this is a cool person, because that's not a, yeah, that's not a term people are accustomed to. But so even if you go into shamanism, right? Uh, they don't talk about these subjects, especially subject like cosmology, in a material perspective, because it was never about objectifying these objects, or sorry, these things in the sky and saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, that place, Venus must have a cool environment because it's bluish in color, and Mars must have a hot environment because it's hot, so they must look like a desert, right? So this is the effect of materialist cosmology on on our minds. But when it comes to the origin of man, definitely it's a vast field. And for me, uh, other than the ancient scriptures, and all of them, by the way, I study all of them. And if you want to understand, like if someone wanted to, what's called pigeonhole me, have you heard that term?
No.
Pigeonhole? No? Okay. So when you pigeonhole someone, you're listening to them, but you can't figure out, hey, is this person a scientist? Is he a Sufi? Is he a Muslim? Is he a
Really,
Hindu?
I didn't
Because the
know this
top,
term.
yeah. So
Okay.
pigeonhole it is putting that person into a box and saying, okay, now I know who it is. So you know how to talk with that person because of their beliefs. So if I guess if you someone wanted to pigeonhole me, I was born into Islam and I practice
Mhm.
it, but at the same time I believe in a concept called omnism, right? And omnism is a deep respect for all ancient religions, not because you say you have respect for them, because you've studied them to the point where you gained valuable truths and knowledge from them, and you were astonished, and you said, okay, just as much as I was affected by the religion I was born in, right, and I searched for the truth within it, I've done the same for all of these other religions, and I've come to the same point that
Mhm.
this is amazing knowledge. It's hair raising. It's bewildering. There's truth in it, and so I definitely can say that I'm more affected by the ancient scriptures and the wisdom found therein, as opposed to so-called scientific discoveries and the knowledge that they provide.
So
I
somebody
feel,
is asking actually,
yeah. Hmm.
what do you mean by spiritual bodies? And I think that you referred to that when you were talking about the moon and the other
Okay.
astral
Yeah.
bodies, let's say.
Sure, astral bodies is a good word too. But spiritual, I use the term to describe anything that we, being physical human beings in this physical realm, things that we are unable to explain with our language because we are limited to the physical
Mhm.
objects and describing them. When it comes to, like for example, a spiritual journey, that's a journey
Mhm.
that you can say it was conducted by the mind, right? But at the same time, it can have a greater effect than any physical journey that we or you have taken, right? So the effect or the knowledge gained from spiritual experiences cannot be undermined by physical experiences or physical things. So
You don't
when I say
necessarily you don't necessarily deny the material part of it. You just adhere a bigger realm to it, right? Like you just
yeah,
adhere a bigger layer to it. If
hmm,
I am understanding correct, right?
sure, yeah. I mean, when I say they're spiritual bodies, when I refer to the moon, sun, and all of the objects or things in the sky, what I mean by that is they are not. I mean, it's not something that we can uh, understand using our physical knowledge. It's not land.
Mhm.
It is not, you know, balls of rock in the sky or in the in so-called space that are just floating around, right? This is what the physical, materialist scientists want us to believe, right?
Mhm.
And when you believe in the physical reality of those things, it takes away from your spiritual nature. That's, I guess,
Mhm.
my point. That these things are spiritual in nature, so therefore they're not going to behave or act like physical bodies, right?
Mhm. I think that's clear, and I do have
Okay.
to go very
Okay.
soon. But
Okay.
I shared with you in WhatsApp, and I will share it also in the Facebook link about
Hmm.
this amazing, truly amazing documentary that Greg Braden, that is one of the humans that I deeply admire because he's a
Hmm.
scientist, but he's
He
deeply
is.
also in spirituality. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
heard about him. So
I
he has
have.
made
Yeah, I have.
this documentary that's called Missing Links, and it talks from energy to human evolution. It's just like really mind blowing because he's based on fact, but he goes beyond, which is my approach always. And I would, if you have the time to follow some of them, it would be great if we can talk about mostly because all the humanitarian evolution that I was talking to you about, it derives from his knowledge. And in my mind and in my heart, it totally makes sense what he's describing. But it's not what we know about humans. So it
Interesting.
would be interesting
Okay.
to take it to another discussion soon.
Yeah. Okay. I guess that coincides with the the origin story, like where did we come from, right?
Exactly.
And what is our history, right? So that, yeah, we can leave that for the next topic. And I mean, I summarized it by saying, yeah, I'm more aligned with ancient scriptures, and that's not because I want to be. It's not about favoritism, but once you have, annihilated materialist, science views within yourself, it becomes even more powerful. What these
Mhm.
scriptures have said, and I take it symbolically, and some of it I take literally as well. But I gain from both the symbolism part, and then the physical descriptions as well. But yeah, it's really interesting. So I'd love to have that discussion with you. And a lot of it is in a way tied up with Amanita muscaria, the mushroom. I think
Hmm.
you and I discussed. Yeah,
Of
yes.
course.
So the origin
We can
origin
take that's
story.
another big that's a very
Yeah,
big subject also.
but no, that's the origin story. My origin understanding is tied in with this mushroom. So we'll talk about it.
So the interesting part is like what you will see in the missing links. It's not necessarily tied with that, but it can be
Okay,
tied.
the missing links. Okay, okay,
Yeah. So let's take
okay,
it to the next
awesome.
time. And thank you so much for today. Good to see you for the closing.
All right, definitely,
Have a
lovely.
good
I
afternoon.
really enjoyed it. Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
You too.
Bye.